I was working in a job for a really long time, and one day my boss came to lay me off. And she told me that I was running a magazine, and so she told me that they were going to put the magazine I was working on under the other editor, and that's why they were eliminating my position. And all of a sudden, I had a thought pop into my head. I wasn't even trying to figure it out. I was just sitting there a little bit shocked. And a thought popped into my head. Oh, they're getting rid of this magazine eventually. And so I said, so are you going to shutter the magazine or are you selling it? And that was like the first thing I said after she said, we're letting you go, which might have surprised her because she was like, why do you ask? And I said, because if you were interested in the long-term viability of both magazines, you'd put them under me because I've already worked on that magazine, so I know how it runs. And that editor has never worked on this magazine, so she doesn't know how it runs. It doesn't make any sense. And so I'm just wondering, like, are you going to sell it or are you going to shutter it? And she sort of like dodged the question and moved on. Within 6 weeks, the whole division was on sale. And that kind of ideas just popping into my head, I never thought of that as intuition. I always thought of that as, I don't know, like maybe I read something or or maybe somebody told me that at some point and it just came to the forefront of my mind. Like if you had asked me where that came from, I never would have said intuition. But it is definitely a form of intuition, and it's called cognizance, and it is an element of air. And air intuition is all about like dropping little ideas or light bulbs, going off over your head, that kind of thing. And that's what we're going to be talking about today as we continue our discussion of the elements in intuition. Welcome to Modern Mystics.
Yay! I really love that story of yours about the air element. For people that are claircognizant or have heavy air, even if it's not claircognizance, other versions of that. For me, it works like a question. I'll be having a conversation with someone and they'll ask a question, and out of my mouth something's coming, and I'm like, wait, but then I know that I know that. And when I was younger, I would leave those situations and panic. What is wrong with me? Why did I say
Oh,
that? Because I don't know where that came from. And I would
yeah.
think, because sometimes I would say, to me, they were harsh things like, oh, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing this. And who am I to tell someone what they should be doing with their life, right? I didn't trust that I could be channeling something greater than me. Like earth, I think air, because it's just a thought, gets mislabeled as
Yes.
myself or yourself, right? It's not labeled as intuition. So I love that story because it demonstrates so well what it's like to be an air intuitive. And especially if you were always an air intuitive, if you're developing that skill, you might notice it more. But if you were that way your whole life, which you were, I know that about you, then yeah, it's very easy to just not even think about it. It's just one of those things that happens in your world. So it's a great example, like perfect.
That's such a good point because like earth intuition can be sort of dismissed because it comes through our senses and we just kind of brush it off or whatever. I air can definitely be overlooked, but it's just as powerful. I think most people when they think about intuition, they think more about that vision, like sight, maybe even auditory, like hearing. But they don't always think about thoughts just kind of getting or certainty, like a feeling of certainty that comes from who even knows where, that kind of thing. But air is this element. It is the element of ideas. It is the element of perspective, understanding something, conviction,
Mhm.
and communication in general. So it's a really interesting when I'm dealing with clients that are air signs and their intuition has air to it, because just because 'cause you're an air sign doesn't mean you're only gonna feel air intuition, or if you're an earth sign doesn't mean you're only gonna feel earth intuition or whatever, or experience earth intuition. I feel like it's a little bit harder for air signs sometimes because they're always thinking, and they're usually thinking in, like, I don't know, 14 directions at the same time. So if something gets dropped in, it's usually like, sometimes it can get caught up in the current of thoughts in general, and it can be dismissed, but also just because we have so many thoughts every day. I think I read somewhere that we have, like, that the average person has, like, something like 10,000 something thoughts a day. I can't remember, but, um, I remember thinking, "Wow, that's a lot. Oh, there's another thought." But anyway,
That's great.
there's something this isn't really foreign to people, because sometimes they have little idea bursts all the time, but what we're looking at for air is kind of recognizing what's there and maybe how it differs a little bit more from the way your thoughts work, and it feels like that's a really good way to do it. But air can also be sound. Um,
Yes.
that idea of, like, hearing a voice or that kind of thing. It's not just the idea being dropped in, but that clear cognizance and then the clear audience are definitely part of it. And we've just been having so much fun talking about the elements. And so we're excited that you're joining us for this installment. And like we've said in the other episodes, we have all of these elements inside of us, right? We're always, we've got fire, water, earth, air, and there's always, that's in everybody all the time, but recognizing the different elements and intuition is something that can really be useful in kind of sifting through your inner voice or your inner thoughts versus your intuition.
Well, and with those elements that all of us have in us, each element also has 3 modes, and we talked about this briefly, I think, with fire,
Oh,
but I wanna point that out with, air, what we're talking about, perspective, right? Maybe that's Gemini air, where we want a lot of perspectives, where Libra air would be weighing it and getting started on an idea and then, going out, and Gemini goes out and finds all the data on it, and then Aquarius is fixed. It's very stubborn air, maybe more like a storm cloud. It's a little higher up, and it's a little icy inside of it, and it doesn't want to move till it drops its truth, right? It drops its wisdom and rains down. It's the water bearer, Aquarius. So, thinking about the rigidity that we can have in our thinking, and that intuition can come in and break that up. And that air can help us, even if you're an air person, if you're Libra and you can't decide, that intuition can put the weight on one side of the scale and say, no, 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 this. Or if you're Gemini and you're too scattered, it can bring you in and channel and contain that flow of air and direct it. So even if you're of heavy air, you can start utilizing air intuition in different modes to counteract the way it's not working for you, to help rein you in or something like that.
I like that.
So yeah, it's we can get as deep as you can go with these, which I love, right? There's endless stones to turn over, but I think that it's important to talk about how air, like just the element of air, like we've talked about with fire and with earth a little bit. We think of air as this, like, kind of like water flowy, and it's cool or it's hot, but we don't really think of air as a storm. We don't really think of air, right? The electricity that goes from the ground and up, is that earth, is that air, is that water, what is it fire, right? But it's kind of this transition point, I think of, and air is part of that. It's the movement of getting things really going, and air can pick up particles of earth. It holds water, and it can damage or inflame fire. It can do both. So it's very interactive with the other elements. And because we live in Western society and we're so cerebral, I think of air a lot as the dominant way that people can get intuition that's acceptable socially.
Hmm.
Where if someone has a lot of water and they're very, well, let me see how I feel about that. That's going to go less great in the boardroom than, well, I was thinking. That's more acceptable. People are more receptive of air intuition. So if you're around people that are not very accepting of you, maybe play with air. Maybe play with that as a intuitive um, playground for a while to see, and that with sound, with air, I have a hole inside the bone near my eardrum. And so I can hear like my heartbeat, I can hear me breathing, I can hear all of the internal noise that people don't hear, but I also hear externally very loudly. I have to keep like my TV, everything I keep really turned down. And I often talk too quiet for people to hear because it sounds so loud to me. So the air with sound has been something that I've played with my entire life. The first time air transformed me was I was 3 and I was taken to my first symphony concert, and I was enraptured, I think is the right word. It was the most profound experience I'd had to that point, and I just needed to make that sound because there was so much that came through the sound of the symphony to me. It was like it was a spiritual experience. Like, as a 3-year-old, as much as I was capable of that, it definitely was that. And I was tone deaf, but I was going to play the violin no matter what because I had to have that. So I started playing violin at 4 to duplicate that symphony. And my mom found this amazing violin teacher that was a concert pianist and violinist by the time she was 5 years old. So she's like a
Wow.
savant, right? I was not. I could not hear. So I wasn't allowed, like most children that learn to play the violin, they tape the notes, like where your finger position goes, because it doesn't have
Mhm.
frets like a guitar. And you're not allowed to tape with Miss Reed. You will learn how to do that. She would push my finger in and slide it on the metal strings, and I would leave with literally bloody fingers. And my mom would be like, "You don't have to do this." I'd be like, "Oh no, I'm doing this because it was such a life-changing experience. I had to get that sound back."
Mm.
And so I don't think we think of air as very emotional, usually. I think we think of it as this cold and logic, but it can be just as enrapturing as water or fire. All of the elements have all of that potential. All those modes are within them. And so if you think, oh, that can't be air that's happening because it's too emotional, maybe. Is it sound? Is it someone speaking to you? Think about if your grandparents have passed away and you heard your grandmother or grandfather's voice. Would that make you emotional? So sound is just as transportive emotionally as anything else. Music is very emotional, right? So is that water? Is that air? This is where we can debate what that element is, right?
Your intuition is so many of those things. Sometimes like phrases won't leave your mind or like words won't leave your mind. Not that they're like on a loop like a mantra or anything, but it'll just like keep coming back up or keep coming up again or that kind of thing, or you'll go right back to that phrase or something. And it could be something you've heard, or it could be something that maybe you need to hear, but it's not connecting yet. But what I also love about air intuition is that it is an idea connector too. Like sometimes it will pull this thing you heard on your way to work with this thing that you read in a book and this thing that your friend said and pull them all together. And I have a lot of like sudden insights like that where I feel like air does this thing where it draws me to something, like my attention to something, a concept, a word. I'm kind of a word nerd, so I think that's, probably part of why this works for me. Um, but it will do a lot of like helping me hone in on that because there's something I need to know, or there's some advice I need to take or something like that. And so, aside from the fact that I would drive my mother crazy asking her what words meant when I was growing up, I also asked her about song lyrics because
Mm.
music and the words of music can also be something that kind of comes back to you to remind you of something, to give you an insight, to connect you to maybe even to someone who's passed, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, you might just get little ditties in your head, or you might get song lyrics sort of repeating that you can't, like, I know we talk about earworms where you can't get like a melody out of your head, but sometimes it'll be the lyrics too. You never know.
Well, and with lyrics, with them getting stuck, yes, but also just eh, like, okay, I'm trying to put this into language. Sorry. My son is a music producer, and I listen to a lot of music that he's in the middle of refining in various forms or an idea or whatever. And it was really hard for me at first because I am so claircognizant, clairsentient, clairaudience, right? That's so much about air and air forms that it was hard for me to listen to music without lyrics.
Oh,
I didn't realize this, but I listen to the words before anything else in a song. That's my order of operations when listening to
got it.
music. The lyrics first, then the melody, then everything else is filler. And my son is reverse of that. He hears the fullness in the
Oh,
back, and who cares if there's lyrics? Who cares? If which is crazy because he has about 9,000 planets in Aquarius. That's his entire chart is air. So it's very interesting to me that that's not the way he hears music. So, you might even
yep.
right, like when you hear music, is it the beat? Is that fire working in you? Is it right? What part of the song is speaking loudest to you? That might be another way
Ah,
for you to discern which element is loudest for you. That's one way to say it, or is most refined already and useful to you. So I really like the idea
yes.
of playing with music lyrics. Have you found this, Jen? I have found that often, like you were saying, it will come from a book, and then the song lyric over here, and you know. You'll just be walking by a coffee shop and someone will say the phrase and you'll be like, oh my God. But it happens a lot for me for clients like that. I'll hear this stuff and it won't make any sense to me. And then the client
Oh,
will sit down. I'll be like, oh, I got you. Here's the puzzle. Here you go. I know all the things to say because
yeah.
it's already come in. Okay.
Yes, that's definitely happened before. I think one of the great things about air intuition is that, like, you know, where fire sort of asks, like, "Ooh, what's possible?" and earth kind of goes, what do we build? That air tends to do, like, how does it all fit together? Like, with your music, for example,
Mhm.
how do lyrics and melody and bass or whatever, how does all of that kind of fit together? But I feel like it's so interesting, that 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 occurrence, there we go. I don't
Mhm.
know what the word is, that occurrence when you have, like, you're doing something totally different, and then the answer comes to you, right? Like,
Mm.
people joke that they get brilliant ideas in the shower, right? And you don't really have to think about what you're doing in the shower, and you got water going, it's a great energy conductor, there's a lot, it's a good, and mostly people don't interrupt you in the shower because, we're not bringing our phones in the shower, things like that, but, every so often, you've got this phenomenon, that's the word, phenomenon where you're doing something totally different and you're not thinking about it, and it all sort of like clicks together, or like the solution presents itself because you're not necessarily like super focusing on it. And so I find it really fascinating because it's almost like air needs a little elbow room before it can give you that perspective, or before it can
Mhm.
connect the dots. Because if we're pushing it too much, or we're like giving it expectations that are pretty heavy or very, very deadline driven or something like that, then sometimes it doesn't really work, especially if it's nothing you've ever done before.
Mhm.
But if you can give it a little bit of breathing room and just kind of let it work in the background, then it can really, really help pull everything together in ways that make a lot more sense.
I really, really love that. I was, as you were speaking, I started getting images of air at different, I guess, heights. So the air that's on the ground is like heavier almost, and air that's up and has perspective. It's like the molecules are further apart, right?
Mhm.
There is space, there is perspective. And the more rushed and hurried, the more embodied we get with that air, the more contaminated that air becomes. And so, right, it becomes my air.
Yep,
Now it's got my perspective. It's embodied within
exactly.
me, or it's being trampled under my feet. Right. That's a very different perspective than that broadness, that perceptive. mm, experience you can get with air. And so I do think, breathing in, we talk about breath as supportive for so many intuitive entrances, right? You can get into
Yes.
intuition through meditation or just through breath work, right? There's so many ways to enter through the breath that I was thinking that part of what air can bring to people is being aware as you're breathing deeply, you're exhaling you to inhale this next perspective, something bigger than you, something broader
Yeah.
than you that could be a meditation on its own. I'm exhaling my perspective and I'm inhaling my intuition's perspective, my psychic gift perspective, my guide's perspective, whatever. You can
I love
claim
that.
that as an inhalation.
I love that because sometimes if you just give air a little bit of space or a little bit of quiet, you can
Mm.
definitely discern it a little bit better from your own thoughts. Um, I mean, it's usually kind of curious, I've noticed. Sometimes air intuition will get your attention and be like, see that? We need to pay more attention to that. Or notice what she just said. That is something you do with you. So remember it or note it or whatever. So you feel like sometimes there, it's like a little bit of like a curiosity tour guide. And it helps people, expand their perspective, learn new skills, see patterns. I have always been a pattern seer, and I always just thought everybody saw it too. So I so I would say so someone would come to me with an issue just in a like a regular dog jog in my regular job, corporate job. Someone would just come to me with like, let's say like just an issue they were having with trying to meet a deadline. And I would like for some reason the air intuition would go, this person learns better this way, and this person feels better about their work when they do it this way, and this person has already told you they're a little bit worried about this. And so if you can put those things to it pulls them together in kind of like this beautiful sort of shape so that I can kind of tailor what I'm saying to that person in a way that they can hear it and not necessarily in a way that I just think it needs to be communicated. And so I think that's really fascinating. It gives me it get because of the patterns, I can help people better because I can connect the dots or because air sort of connects the dots for me. I can bring those together and be like, "Oh, but I can't say that because you don't learn like that and it will just
Mm.
confuse you," like that kind of thing. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that are really, really interesting to me to see how my brain kind of connects things. But I also think that air is like likes to learn things, or really likes to understand things better. And so there is kind of like a thirst. You were saying it's not super emotional. It's not, but it can be very moving and it can be very intense even. And it can also be kind of amusing, like when those, dots kind of get connected for you and you go, oh, that's why this is happening. And you're like, why didn't I see it? Like things like that all the time are such an important way to deal with air. But I think the cool thing about air, like you were saying, if we just have a little quiet, little bit of breath, little bit of, just maybe doing something else for a minute, maybe, that kind of thing. You have to be open to receive it. It's not really something that you create. It's something that you're still going to try to receive by being a little open, by making some time for it, by giving it a little bit of breathing room. And I think that's really important because sometimes when we think about thinking through a problem, we think we have to think harder or we have to think differently or something like that. But really, what air intuition does is just if you give it, if you try and force it, it doesn't work. But if you're in more of like a receptive place, it can connect the dots for you and help you a lot.
I think that's a super important point that we haven't made with fire or earth yet. Is intuition is about receiving something. It's not about force. I don't care what mode you're using and what element you're using. If you're trying to be like, okay, I'm going to feel so much passion now, it doesn't usually work.
No.
Fire doesn't just it's very hard to duplicate. That's why people fall out of love and relationships end. If passion was easy to just create like that, I think people would rather do that than break up a 20-year marriage. It would be
Yep.
easier to stay together, but they
Yep.
don't because you can't force these things.
That's such
We
a
are
good point.
receiving them. So I really love that you said that. And then also a second ago, you were talking about, you're in this reception mode. You're kind of led. And one of the ways it works a lot for me, and I think you even said the word curious, I will often find myself curious about things that, why am I curious about that? If I stopped and thought about it, I would be like, why am I looking this up? This is, no, the curiosity of air leads you. That's one of the that's at least for me, that is one of the ways that air invites me to receive. Is I get
Yes.
these thoughts of what's this or what's that. So
Hmm.
the loving to learn, I think, is one of the keys for air intuition. You ask a question, it's almost like the intuition sends the question. And then that curiosity leads you. And then you found the answer for that client that's in 3 days that you don't even know is coming yet. So the curiosity, I think, is something for you to watch and play with specifically. See what you're curious about and follow instead of judging it or ignoring it. Go look up why earthworms, can grow heads from both sides. I don't know why. Why is that what you're curious about? Go follow some of those odd curiosities that come to you and see if they don't end up being beneficial, intuitive things for you. And,
I
and
love that.
air is different. Earth is the now, fire is the future, and air kind of goes between those. It can be for now, it can be for the past. We remember a lot of things that are lessons to learn that say, hey, remember when that thing happened? Don't do that again. Hey, remember when you were curious about earthworms and that was just you being weird? And remember when you got that intuition that was about this? This is what this is again. So air kind of goes between past, present, future. It's not as earth is pretty. I mean, earth can go back. We can get familial roots through the body. I'm not saying they only go one direction, but when someone's starting out, I most often see earth as a present tense thing. I most often see fire as future oriented hope thing, and air kind of doesn't, and water doesn't either. The air and water kind of are more flowy and don't
Hmm.
really stick to a tense language, right? We're using language terms
Yes.
today. So
That's
it's
a
not
great way
really
to look at it.
sticking to a tense.
When I was a kid, speaking of like present and future and all of that, when I was a kid and I was in school, I had a great knack for knowing what to write down in
Mhm.
my notes because I could get this little tap on my shoulder that's like, that's probably going to be on the test. She's talked about that 3 times, probably going to be on the test. Like there are all of these like little things that I could that air could kind of like point out to me maybe. And so then I would write them down. Then if I write things, I usually remember them and then I'd be okay on the test. So it was really fascinating to me because when I figured out like how my brain worked, I just thought I had a good memory. But I think, and I don't know that that's actually true. I think that I just like the element of air works through me a lot. And I
Mm.
think it helps. I just naturally have a very curious mind. I'm always there's also a lot of Scorpio in my chart, so I like to, like, dig and find things and figure them out and that kind of thing. But I think because I'm just naturally very curious, in fact, sometimes I honestly drive people crazy because I'll be like, "Well, what does that mean for blah 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 then?" And they'll be like, "Jennifer, I know as much as you do," like, and I'll be like, but I'll be thinking like, but that could go a little further, right? Like, or that could implicate that a little bit differently, or, anyway, so there's a lot of like ways that even though I have very little air in my chart, that the element of air works in my intuition very, very seamlessly almost.
Well, and I think that's a really good point because you might have less air in your chart than say something else. Um, but we can still get there through aspects between the planets talking, through rulerships. So, if I have Cancer rising, the moon rules my chart. So I'd be a heavy water chart.
Mm,
So, there's lots of ways to get to those elemental balances. So just because someone says, oh, I'm, an earth sun or an earth moon, that means I'm not air. No, it's not that simple. You have all of them in you. And we can get to those modal balances, those elemental balances, a lot of different ways in astrology. And it depends on the astrologer and the method of astrology they're using. All of us will come up with a different elemental balance. So
that's true.
trust that you're being led, right? Like Jennifer, and I can be astrologically, let's say I'm all fire. Let's say I only have Sagittarius and that's it. And all the planets are in Sagittarius. I have the weirdest chart ever, and that's how it is. Yet my intuition works through air because psychic gifts are separate, right? There's something we're receiving. So just because you are elementally one way doesn't mean those other intuitions don't work with you. Most people do tend to follow their elemental balance of their astrology from my experience, but not everyone, right? Not everyone.
Yeah.
So um, I like that you're talking about this. And when you're talking, I'm hearing Saturn. Saturn can build structures and systems, and you're like, oh, but this goes here and this person goes here
Uh-huh.
and this team member needs this way and this team member, right? That's all
Yep.
Saturn to me. That's all Earth. But
Yep.
Saturn is very logical. Saturn's very air Earth. Right? So
Yes.
Saturn traditionally rules Capricorn and Aquarius,
Yeah.
right? So it is air earth or earth air.
I
So
think
don't be stuck, right? That's we don't want you to get rigid in this. This is just an idea of a way to
yep.
introduce you to intuition. It's not the rule or the way. It's access. That's what we're trying to create for
Yes.
you.
We're just talking about listening a little differently too,
Mm.
right? If we're going to make space for air to kind of, give us information or connect dots for us or that kind of thing, it's not necessarily like listening like you're listening to us. It's more like kind of inward listening, for lack of a better way to say it. And sometimes you will notice maybe somebody says the same thing kind of in three different ways, or sometimes you'll just pay attention and hear like different kinds of values that are coming through sometimes too. But I honestly feel like listening trying to listen is that making space for receiving. Actually sitting and or trying to find some quiet when 80,000 things are trying to get our attention every day is a spiritual act, and it is one where we can make a little bit more space for those ideas to kind of get dropped in or for those dots to be connected. Do you, since you're the meditator out of the two of us,
Mm.
is meditation a way to clear your mind? Or is meditation a way to make space so that that air intuition can come in? Or is it like a little bit of both?
Meditation is a tool that I use both of those ways. Definitely. I can use it either way. I can use it to settle and ground, right? Maybe that's the air by my feet. Or I can use it to make space and open up to hear and receive. And for me, that works through the beginning, setting the intention. What is this meditation for?
Okay.
Is this meditation to receive? I have a client coming in 3 minutes. and I've got 3 minutes to get ready for them, and what do I need to hear? Or is this meditation of, I'm gonna murder people, so maybe I should get back in my body and calm the F down, right? So,
Yes.
what is the meditation
Thank you for
for?
doing that rather than being
Yes,
homicidal.
yes,
Yes.
it's these are
Yeah.
good choices. No murdering people. So, if we wanna utilize meditation as a tool, right? It can work either way, at least it does for me. But one of the things, right, I think of air, I think of the throat, and something that I've noticed with myself, this was first me, and then with many other people. Remember at the beginning, I was talking about how I would say things. They'd pop out of me. That was intuition. That was the everything speaking through me. And then I'd panic. Oh my God, what did I say to that person? Ooh. And it would just be, yeah, because I hadn't found my voice yet. It wasn't okay for me to speak yet. So how could intuition speak through me?
Mm.
So if you're an air intuitive and you have never allowed your throat chakra to be open, really open, and say what you mean and say what you think and be genuine and unapologetically you with your voice, you're going to have a hard time receiving air intuition. So, um, you might need to work on opening your throat chakra. You can do this through toning, through singing. There's a lot of ways to speak that aren't being confrontational. For a lot of people, that can be very difficult. And so even if it's if you have a car, if you don't have a car, go find a closet. Go someplace where you can be alone and say all the things, but say them out loud. Don't think them in your head. Say them out of your mouth, and it will start opening up your chakra so that then it can come through you. After I learned to speak my truth, when it came through me, I could discern what was me and what was the everything. And then I didn't panic because it wasn't me saying that. It was the everything, and the everything doesn't mess up. I can trust that it's going to say the right thing to people. Lola, no, she messes up. She says the wrong thing a lot. The everything does not. But if I haven't learned what my voice sounds like, how will I know?
Exactly. And if you haven't had enough practice with your intuition, you might not be able to decipher that either. So just a little bit of quiet can really help you learn better how your intuition speaks, whether it's coming through earth or any other element, I mean, air or any other element. I was just thinking when you were talking about kind of channeling the everything, sometimes when I am in readings, sometimes my brain is definitely trying to figure out the best way to say something. Sometimes and I talk in a lot of metaphors. I don't know, it's just like the natural way I speak when I'm giving messages, but sometimes in a reading, I will say a word that I don't even know what it really means, but the other person does. Or I didn't even think that was the right word to say, but it like tied into something that the other person said. I remember like mentioning like, how wolves travel in packs. And I was like, what am I saying? Like there's a part of my brain that's like, what? But it turned out that the wolf was like that person's spirit animal or something. And so they connected right to it without me even caring. So I think sometimes one of the gifts of all of this is almost like getting out of my own way so that I can say what that person needs to hear, and I don't even need to know that, I just need to say it. And it's not like every single time I say things that are super dictated to me, through but air definitely comes in and gives me different words to say or the right kind of metaphor or that kind of thing, and I think that's really helpful.
Well, and I really like this because again, we're talking about reception with air and the receiving of someone else, what they need, right? So, okay. Apparently, Mercury is in retrograde right now. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Yes.
We have language and we would like to use it right now, Mercury.
Yes.
So if you could just back up 2 steps, that'd be great.
My goodness.
Okay, so listening, because we're talking about finding your voice and speaking, but
Sure.
also hearing a client's language that we need to then let come through, right? And
Mhm.
so it's that subtle hearing where the client didn't say wolves are a great symbol for me. Please speak in wolf metaphor. They didn't say that to you. That'd be really
No.
weird, but you heard it.
Yes.
Your intuitive part of you picked that up. Out of all of the symbols Jen could have used, wolf came out because you were listening, because you were receiving. And so just like we need to practice speaking, just like we need to practice having our own voice be something that we know and understand, we also need to know what listening is like. And we just moved, as you can probably see, again, to the ever-changing backdrop of Lola's video feed. Okay. So, getting into this house, it's not that old of a house. It's only like 25 years old or something, but it's very creaky. It has a lot to say. It's a very loud house. And my husband loves it. He likes old creaky stairs, and he'll be like, oh, listen. And he'll like step on the steps and off. I'm like, what are you doing? You're so weird. But it's been hilarious to listen to this house, to hear its voice physically, literally. I can hear the voice of the home, but also metaphorically, and hearing the home speak to me what it needs as the new caretakers of this piece of dirt and this structure. I need to know what it needs. And so listening to buildings, listening to birds or squirrels, or, you know, Jen lives with the God's messengers, the birds. And so every day she gets to hear messages. I think that's beautiful.
I think it is too. I also think that it's funny because just in listening, you can learn so many different things, even with animals, because sometimes, like, if you have a dog, you probably know, like, one bark is different from another, or, this particular noise or vocalization means I'm hungry, like that kind of thing. And I think there's no reason why we couldn't do that also with the people around us, the land around us, the homes that we live in, that kind of thing. It's all about connection and about being in relationship with something. And I like that you were talking about you didn't quite know your voice until you discovered it. I feel like once I figured out my intuition, I can always tell if something is my opinion or if my intuition is coming through. And there are many readers that I've met that won't read for friends or family members because they're too close to them. But it's very different how I get information that's intuitive versus my own thoughts or my own feelings or my own opinions. And sometimes things will come through me that are kind of opposite of what I would say if anybody were asking my opinion. So I'll be like, oh, well, of course that's not me, that kind of thing. But sometimes it's like it could be aligned, but just a tiny bit different. So it's really interesting to practice these kinds of things when you're in kind of quiet spaces, because then when you're in noisy spaces or you've got a lot of things, kind of competing for your attention, then you'll be a little more familiar with the ways your intuition's speaking so that you can distinguish it, because it does have its own sort of tenor, its own sort of voice, and even its own energy, honestly, at the end of the day, because the energy of my opinion is so different than the energy of like whatever the everything is thinking at that time. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to kind of play with this. And I think, because there's like kind of ideas being dropped into your head with air, or there's connections, or that sometimes clairaudience is involved where you just kind of might hear a noise or someone's voice. That is all very receptive, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so there's a lot of really good ways to practice. And so we've already talked about doing something else, and we've talked a little bit about meditation. Also, I swear we have a meditation from season 1 somewhere. So I'll see. I'll put that up on our blog. It's called You Are the Oracle. It's from our You Are the Oracle
Yeah,
episode, I think.
you are right. And that's perfect because the oracle is about finding your voice, finding
Yes.
so that's a perfect. Yes, we do have that. And it's
And
kind
it's
of a
nice.
loud meditation. Like the music is kind of loud. It's kind of counter to what we've been saying.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, it will be interesting. I do think with the uh, I remember us talking about this, and I think it's an important distinction. And you've said it 14 times, and it stood out to me. By the way, this has stood out to my intuition that you've kept saying in a quiet place, somewhere where it's more, away from. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what is this about the noise? And I was like, oh, duh, I remember. subtle sounds, we can turn on air intuition when we start to be able to distinguish with these ears, these physical ears, subtle sounds.
Oh,
So get in nature someplace actually pretty quiet. Can you hear the insects on the leaves? Start training your ears to hear. And just like with the mind's eye, we have mind's hearing, we have the mind's ear, and it is fine-tuned. And that's what you were talking about. You can tell the difference
yep.
between your mind's ear versus Jen's ear, your mind's voice versus Jen's voice, your mind's eye versus Jen's eyes.
Uh-huh.
And that is through subtlety. That is a refining, something you've sat with over time. Probably when you first started playing with the intuition, even though you might have felt it was different because something felt different, you probably weren't confident yet to go all in on that
Right.
intuition and be like, yes, I'm going to bet the farm on that. Where
Yes.
today you'd be like, okay, now it's time to bet the farm. I don't
Yep.
love to bet, but you said bet, and okay, I'm going to trust, right?
I love
But
that.
you've earned that. Your intuition has earned that with you.
Yes.
So
I
this
also think
subtlety.
it's fascinating because I used to tell people that the lights were too loud when I was
Uh-huh.
in like different offices or classrooms or things, and they would be like, "What?" Because they didn't hear the humming that I heard. So I feel like even indoors you can look for or you can listen for a lot of subtle things. Or one of the best ways I think you could practice listening is to listen to, it has to be a classical piece of music. So some classical piece of music, and pick an instrument and see, not, maybe not like a dominant one, like a violin or something, but like, if there's like an organ in it sometimes, or there's like like there's some kind of drumming or like, I don't know, like
The oboe.
oboes.
Get the
Yeah.
oboe in the background, right?
Yeah, things like that. There's something about, like, listening to it and seeing if you could kind of pick it up, because there's so many great instruments that, come together to make kind of a single sound, that
Mhm.
sometimes that it's hard to pick it out, but it's one of those things that can help with a lot of subtlety. I actually heard someone say you could do that as a form of meditation, to just really focus on one instrument and just kind of block out everything else. I don't know that I've tried it that way, but that's another way you can kind of play, 'cause I can hear if the sounds are off with my birds. I'm
Mhm.
sure anyone who's been a mother can hear if, like, the sounds are off with their kiddo, or their kiddos are not getting along, or, or there's too much quiet and you're like, "Okay, now I'm suspicious." But also I can hear if my house sounds a little weird. Like, I know what the air conditioning turning on sounds like, and I know what the, water heater turning on sounds like. Like, I know a lot of these things, so if there are different things that kind of pop in, then I know they're out of the ordinary. So just practicing listening is a great idea. Don't close your eyes, but it would be fun in the car, because where you're driving and who you're driving with are always changing, but you can hear, like, how your tires sound on the road, or, how the hum of traffic is. Like, there's just a lot of subtleties out there that get kind of lost as white noise sometimes, but are really fun to play with and see, where you can take it.
Well, and I think that's a great point to not close your eyes while you're driving, please. If you're driving, don't. If you're a
Yes,
passenger,
please
go
don't.
ahead. But
Yes.
I love that because while we're talking about air, right, 80% of the brain's processing power is dedicated to vision if your eyes are open. So if you really want to go hear nature or your
Oh,
house talk or, the subtle sounds within driving, close your eyes. You will pick up way more because your brain is not taking in all the visual data and it can dedicate more brain power to sound. And the same is
that's
true with
awesome.
touch or feeling for water. So if you're using one of those other senses, then sight, close your eyes and you free up a ton of neural pathway
I love
energy.
that. When we're talking about symbolism with different elements, that the symbols that can kind of come through for us when we're looking for signs and symbols that have a little bit more of an air slant, they tend to be more things like words or quotes or song lyrics, like we were talking about. Sometimes you'll just like kind of replay a conversation, or a conversation you had will come back around, or you might hear repeated phrases, things like that. As far as like signs that have more air quality, I know that a lot of people feel like finding feathers. I mean, people that don't live with parrots feel like finding feathers is a really good um, kind of sign or symbol for them. So there's a lot of that kind of thing too. Do you have any, I don't know, favorite like symbol things that might have to do more with air, or personal meaning things that have to do more with air?
Yeah, there's a little piece of me that's like, no, that's a Sag symbol, but it's the arrow. I think of
Oh,
Aang and from The Last Airbender, and
yes.
his air buffalo with all the arrows, and he has all the tattoo arrows, the flow of the air, and so arrows are very symbolic to me of air. And so another symbol for me with air is seashells. Even though you can hear the water, it's hearing. So,
Yeah,
like, the conch shell is an air symbol to me, even though it's very water-based. And I think it's a lot of air we don't think of as water, but Aquarius is the water bearer, that's its name. So we
right.
have earth, the clay vessel, we have the water within the earth, and then we have the being that is the thinking, doing something with the water and the earth, and that is air. And so I often feel like, again, air switches between past, present, future. It switches between which other element it's working with. Hey, look over there and see that thing, right? Hey, did you hear that sound? Air is, oh, did you notice that sensation on your body? That's air and another element working together, because thinking is one of our primary ways to notice things for all humans.
Absolutely.
So it's very collaborative, but the conch shell and arrows, yeah, and feathers. Feathers are a big one, but birds in general, to me,
Yeah.
birds, period, symbolize air to me.
I was in Florida several years ago to officiate a wedding, and I was sitting outside, and they have wild parrots, smaller parrots, but they
Mm.
have wild parrots in Florida, which I didn't know, because all of a sudden, I'm listening to all the, the breeze and the ocean lapping against the shore, and then all of a sudden I heard what would have been one of my birds, like that kind of thing.
Mm.
So it's kind of fun, like in different places. I wonder about things like when you're in Australia and you see big old parrots, or you're in South America and you see big old parrots, like things like that. If they become different kinds of symbols because they're indigenous to those places and they're, flying around and doing their thing. I love the arrow, and I really love the idea of like the air in the seashell. I think that's so great. And just like every other symbol or sign, we're not asking you to think it always means something. It's just kind of like, if it resonates with you, um, you might even ask yourself, well, what does that mean for me today? Because some days you might look at it and be like, oh, that's a pretty shell. And then other days you might be like, oh, I really needed that, whatever kind of message that came through it, or that kind of thing. So it's more about making sure that it resonates with you than whether or not you're right about it, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm. The importance, again, just like meditating, setting the intention has a lot to do with the meaning. So if I've asked my guides for a message and a conch shell shows up from, I'm watching SpongeBob SquarePants, right? Or whatever. And now I have this shell showing up in my everyday life. And I'm from Arizona. That's where I grew up. So if I have a shell showing up, it doesn't belong there. It's out of the ordinary. If I am from the San Diego area, maybe it's less of a big deal, right? So again, using logic, like we've talked about many times in many episodes, along with your intuition is important, but setting in the intention really will help you discern the meaning of that sign, hopefully.
I agree.
I have really enjoyed, I was talking to someone who had listened to the other two elements the other day, and they were saying how much they loved it and how many answers it was giving them, and how they were referring people to it. So we would love to hear more
Nice.
about that from you guys, so we can include more in our final last episode of the elements of what you guys want to hear about with the element of water, but also just, how this is working for you guys. If there's questions you have, any other things like that, we'd love to hear.
Oh, yeah, or what are your experiences with the element of air in your intuition? You just never know. Or what are your experiences with that quiet listening or the meditations or that kind of thing? Because we always learn from you as well. So we appreciate your comments, your follows, your emails, all of that, your likes on our shares, all of those things. So please continue the conversation and just continue to work with your intuition and see how it goes. And we're here to help, and we're here to be a good resource, and so are our other listeners. It's a good little community that we seem to be building, and I'm very excited about that.
Thanks so much for joining us today.